This is the Middle-earth philosopher. If you've been watching my videos, then you know that when it comes to the Valar and Maiar, that I rarely give them a pass when it comes to what transpires in Middle-earth due to, or indirectly to, their actions. But one of the more positive aspects about the rule was that some of them had a very strong attachment to Middle-earth proper. So strong in many cases that most of those spirits end up choosing to stay in Middle-earth proper. And I was curious about this. How is it that the main Valar, with a couple of exceptions, can be so disconnected from the world across the sea, and yet some of them, or their minions, remain so attached that they choose to leave Valinor, in some cases permanently? We should start briefly from the beginning. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into a whole long description. Basically, when Uru-Ilúvatar showed the vision for his plans for the world in whatever dimension they were in before the beginning, the Silmarillion says that his accompanying spirits were all in all of what they had seen, even Melkor, and decided to participate in one form or another. Right from the get-go, then, like the flame imperishable itself, the desire within these spirits was ignited for Middle-earth. Now, that being said, the book leaves enough ambiguity, I think, that there were other spirits besides Maiar and Valar that were also obsessed with the creation, and this leaves room for other types of quote-unquote lesser spirits that are mentioned in the books like Fellowship of the Ring to enter the world. So, I'll go into some examples here. Starting with the Valar themselves, I think their obsession with Middle-earth goes through phases. At first, it appears that they intended to be fully active in the world, despite the limits placed on them. There doesn't seem to be any kind of barrier or intent of segregation when it comes to the living inhabitants of the world between mortals and immortals by the time primeval Elmarin was finished. Yet, this radically changes with its destruction and the rescue of the remnants of that perfect world, aka Valinor. After that, with the exception of Umo, the Valar and Maiar largely stay away from Middle-earth because the memory of what could have been hurts too much. The beauty that still remains is overshadowed by the memory of what could have been, along with the looming threat of Melkor. And, even after he's captured, they are still so enamored with what could have been, the memory that Middle-earth could have been anyway, that Middle-earth proper is left to its own devices. But that's not all of them. I mentioned Umo as a prime example, and I did an earlier video on him already. The long and short of it, though, being that he sees it as his duty to the people of the world, as well as the world itself, and to Uru, to watch over the progression of the world and to keep it from being continually corrupted and destroyed by Melkor and any other evil spirits that may be there. And I believe that he sees that his peers are neglecting this duty, which is why he's hardly ever in Valinor and rarely interacts with them. And I don't think he's interested in isolating himself because of an attachment to a memory. His Maiar, second in command, Ose, along with his wife, Union, also have a passion for Middle-earth, to the point of violence, where if someone violates Middle-earth or the people that they are attached to, then they will violently turn on them if they touch the seas. Ask the Númenóreans about that one. The horseman of the Valar, Orome, was also active in Middle-earth for a time, hunting the monsters that were twisted by Melkor, but at the same time was never a permanent feature. He would always return back to Valinor at some point, and essentially all the evil creatures had to do was wait till he left. Unfortunately, because of the events of what happened with Elmarin, any beauty that was in the world that still remained, which the elves did see, and the humans as well, could not be seen by the Valar, because the memory blocked that. Rather, at least according to the emissaries that were sent to Númenor during the Second Age, right before they went to the dark side, it seems like the world had instead become a burden to them, an increasing burden, and that the desire that burdened them so long ago was dwindling. And, like a long-lasting relationship, was starting to plateau. It sapped out much of the color and vibrancy that they once saw, despite still caring for it on one level or another. I think perhaps the last straw was Numenor's betrayal and invasion, being that they had blessed these people, trying to encourage beauty that they had in their own lands, and yet it was now being turned against them. Yes, Uru did separate Valinor to another dimension or something, yet within the Valar themselves, I think something may have actually died by that point. The most interesting case during the interim period of the First Age of Melkor's capture was Melian, a powerful Maiar in her own right, who was tending to Middle-earth while it was under the darkness. She was there so often that she eventually met one of the first elf lords, Thingol, fell in love with him, apparently, after just staring at each other for a long time. Okay. And basically moved into his place in Beleriand as his wife. Her attachment to Middle-earth was twofold. One, being a deep care for tending to nature, as she was taught. And two, being her love for Thingol and committing herself to sharing his burdens and cares as most couples would. Even more interesting about Melian is that both attachments, I believe, are actually rooted in a kind of naivety. One shared, I think, by most of the West. She is not familiar with the changing nature of the world from when she first came to Middle-earth, being isolated from the rest of it by her barrier over Doriath during the Beleriand Wars, and only comes to fully grasp just how fundamentally the world had changed with the 1-2 combo of the realization of a resurrected daughter, Luthien, becoming fully mortal, and the death of Thingol after he pissed off some dwarves and got murdered for it. This truth, I think, becomes too much for her to bear, and it's only then that she returns to Valinor. There are other spirits, as I mentioned, that were not part of either the Maiar or the Valar or had any association with Melkor. The most mysterious among them being Tom Bombadil. Now, much has already been said about what the hell was this guy. And I mentioned Valar or Maiar, Manwë himself, maybe even Uru. No clear explanation is given, except that he says that he came into Eriador during the beginning when the world was dark yet not corrupt. I think this implies that this was either during the Almiran times or the interim period of Melkor's capture. Either way, his power was clearly immense, as the One Ring doesn't bother him at all, whereas Gandalf, Maiar himself, won't even touch the damn thing. And his attachment is much more singular and localized. A love for Middle-earth, but specifically focused on the forests of Eriador and his wife, Goldberry. Within the lore, he somehow manages to stay clear of the changes that happen across the 3 ages of the world, while still preserving at least some of his territory. Very similar to Melian, actually, but was able to cope with the changing nature of the world. He wasn't hiding from it as she was, just choosing not to involve himself. Speaking of the Third Age, what are the mysterious wizards sent by Valinor? Each of them, I think, develops a specific attachment to Middle-earth, and the results being varied. 2 being unknown canon-wise. Gandalf being a care for the people, especially the hobbits, and their simple outlook and lifestyle. Radagast being a developing care and love for nature to almost, you could argue, an extreme level, to the point where he arguably eventually forsakes the original mission that he was sent there for, and during the War of the Ring, when people are looking for him, no one's able to find him. And it's not mentioned if he would ever return back to Valinor. Therefore, some consider him a failure. But did he? I mean, he's not mentioned he was ever killed. And he also seemed quite content communing fully with nature and helping out with what limited ways that he could. So, can you really call that a failure? Because I doubt he sees it that way. Of course, there's Saruman, who fell into the same trap as Morgoth and Sauron in becoming so obsessed with the world as to want to reshape it as he saw fit. Sure, that turned out for him just as well as it did for the other guys. So, the common theme in all these characters' attachment to the world is that there is something about it in its fundamental nature, some fundamental beauty or potential aspect of greatness that draws them to it. Something in its potential that was originally there and for whatever reason still remained even in despite of Melkor's damage in the very beginning. It's something the Valar have trouble seeing, and that it seems like lesser spirits have an easier time seeing as long as they can cope with the changes, or I should say, the outer changes that happen around that core being of the world. But what do you guys think? Do you think there's another reason why so many spirits became so attached to the world that they chose to remain? Do you think the Valar still had a love for Middle-earth despite all that's happened and all the suffering and betrayal that they went through? Because they did. Let me know in the comments below. And this is the Middle-earth Philosopher. You guys have a good day.